Support comes from Able Light, working closely with families with the goal of providing life-changing support for individuals with developmental disabilities for greater independence and rewards. More information at ablelight.org.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the hour, we'll talk with Republican State Representative Richard West about why he backed moving school board elections in St. Charles County from April to November. We'll also talk with Democratic Illinois Lieutenant Governor hopeful Christian Mitchell about Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker's third-term agenda and why he's ready to take over if Pritzker departs for the national arena. But first, for nearly 50 years, Missouri's 1st Congressional District has been a beacon of political strength for St. Louis's Black community. African Americans have constituted either a majority or plurality of the 1st District's population, all but guaranteeing that a Black resident of St. Louis or St. Louis County is likely to represent the region in Congress. But the future of the 1st District is murky, thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in a case known as Louisiana versus Calais. 6 out of 9 judges ruled the state's map was unconstitutional, effectively weakening Voting Rights Act protections of legislative districts where racial minorities make up the majority of the population. Because lawmakers could not adopt a new map in time for the 2026 elections, Missouri did not join states like Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee in redrawing congressional lines ahead of the midterms. But that does not give much comfort to defenders of the 1st District, including the person who represents it, Democratic Congressman Wesley Bell of St. Louis County.
When we look at the folks who fought and died for the Voting Rights Act, which benefits everyone, let me be clear on that. I think that it is terrible that we're seeing a redistricting war, which is essentially benefiting a few politicians, but is hurting and silencing so many voices of folks who want to have their right to have their voice expressed in their vote.
The possibility that Missouri could be on the precipice of another mid-decade congressional redistricting saga is jarring for a number of reasons. The GOP-controlled legislature isn't even a year removed from a contentious special session where lawmakers dismantled the Kansas City-based 5th District. That move is still tied up in legal challenges around a referendum trying to overturn the plan. But more notably, some Missouri Republicans have turned against a district they not only defended for decades, but also helped create. And it's threatening to tear apart an unusual alliance between Black St. Louis Democrats and Missouri Republicans. The deal for both sides was straightforward. By creating the 1st District, Black St. Louisans were all but guaranteed to send an African American to Congress. Republicans, especially over time, became favored to win in nearby suburban districts since the heavily Democratic African American population wasn't spread out to those seats. As former St. Louis Alderman Mike Jones explained to me in 2021, Black Democrats trusted Republicans because the most strident opponents of the 1st District were white Democrats who felt the arrangement hurt the party.
If you're Black in America doing politics, Republicans have tendency to be existential enemies, and white Democrats are totally unreliable. So you got one group that you can't stand and another group that you can't trust.
In recent months, this alliance has come under unprecedented strain. The 2025 special session marked the first time in recent memory where not a single Black Democrat voted for a congressional map. For context, St. Louis lawmakers routinely crossed the aisle to vote for new lines in 2022 and 2011. After the Louisiana versus Calais decision, Republicans like Secretary of State Denny Hoskins called for lawmakers to redraw the 1st District to be winnable for the GOP.
With the new U.S. Supreme Court decision that said you can't have racist gerrymandering districts, then obviously the governor and the legislature could either go into a special session sometime this fall, or that could be a priority for them next session as far as to redistrict those districts again to get rid of the racial gerrymandering.
Some of this newfound animosity toward the 1st District's construction has to do with raw political opportunity. Missouri Republicans see a chance to turn a previously unwinnable congressional seat into a district where they can prevail. Some of it also has to do with President Donald Trump, who pushed for states to eliminate majority-minority districts in an attempt to prevent Republicans from losing the U.S. House this fall. Others, including Hoskins and Missouri U.S. Senator Eric Schmitt, have contended as of late that majority-minority districts are inherently racist. Schmitt made that argument during a recent Senate hearing.
We're heading into an election cycle. Every election held under an unconstitutional map compounds the injury. Every illegal district that remains in place distorts the House of Representatives and denies American districts drawn under the Constitution rather than racial arithmetic. The left will say this guts the Voting Rights Act. It does not. It saves the Voting Rights Act from becoming what the Constitution forbids, a command to discriminate.
Black political figures completely reject the idea that majority-minority seats like the 1st District are racist or racially discriminatory. If anything, they contend the seat helps give African Americans a better opportunity to wield political power, something that is especially important in a St. Louis region that's grappled for generations with racism, housing segregation, economic inequality, and educational disparity. And notably, not all Missouri Republicans are eager to embark on another redistricting journey. In fact, one of the people who is openly questioning whether transforming the 1st District into a more Republican seat is a good idea is Eddie Grime, the Kansas City-based attorney who represented the successful plaintiffs in the Louisiana versus Calais case.
There's a practical point, which is maybe trying to make that more Republican will just endanger the 3 neighboring districts, and it just may not make sense.
What Grime is alluding to here is how any effort to convert the 1st District into a seat that Republicans can win would require placing portions of St. Louis and St. Louis County into 4 or 5 largely rural congressional districts. Many of those seats may appear to be strongly Republican, but that's based on election results where the GOP is dominant in rural counties, something that may not be sustained as Trump fades from the political scene. State Representative Steve Butts, a Democrat from St. Louis, says that with Trump's approval ratings in a downward spiral, Missouri Republicans would be foolish to do his bidding, as they did last year when the president pressured the GOP to dismantle the 5th District.
We do enough fighting about the maps and gerrymandering once every 10 years to say that this could conceivably happen every 2 or every 4 years. I hope that no one has the stomach for that. I mean, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. That's not good for anyone.
Another consideration is how the 2026 election cycle unfolds. If, for instance, Democrats retake the U.S. House by a substantial margin, there could be less pressure for Missouri Republicans to listen to a politically weakened president who will be barred from running again in less than 2 years. Others, like State Representative Carla May of St. Louis, say that if Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Kansas City prevails in his bid for re-election in the 5th District, it may send a message to Republicans to back off another redistricting gambit.
And I'm hoping that they elect Reverend Cleaver to send a loud message that we're not going to tolerate this type of leadership. And I think this is poor leadership when you do something of that nature. It's all about greed, and it doesn't do anything to help Missourians at all.
But State Senator Brian Williams says black political leaders like himself should not get complacent. The University City Democrat noted that Cleaver developed deep relationships with powerful Republicans and the GOP-controlled legislature still sought to oust him when Trump made the demand. St. Louisans, Williams says, need to be prepared for a similar attack against the 1st District in the coming months.
I don't put anything past this administration to influence the legislatures throughout the country. And I think this summer we need to be just as engaged, encouraging folks to register to vote, and most importantly, talk about the importance of protecting voting rights as well as representation in our city and beyond.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk with Republican State Representative Richard West about why he supports moving school board elections in St. Charles County from April to November. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We noted during a show earlier this month that the Missouri General Assembly was very productive over the 2026 session. The last week did not feature the typical melodrama that stalls legislation, but rather lawmakers actually debating and sending bills to Governor Mike Kehoe. One measure that was sent to the GOP chief executive on or near the last day of session moves a slew of school-related elections in St. Charles County from April to November. GOP State Senator Adam Schnelting's bill passed through the House by a closer than usual margin, mainly because a number of Republicans crossed party lines to vote against it. Still, backers of the idea contend that it will bolster interest and civic participation in important elections with real financial consequences. That includes State Representative Richard West, a Wentzville Republican who handled the legislation in the House. West joins us right now. Representative, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Afternoon, Jason. Thank you for having me here.
Before we touch on the discourse around the legislation, I want to talk about what it actually does. Currently, St. Charles County School Board elections are held in April. When would the first November elections take place under this bill?
So the first November elections would take place in 2028, November of 2028.
And this bill mentions that school board members would be subjected to 4-year terms instead of 3, correct?
Currently, we have 3-year terms. It would move them to 4-year terms, yes.
Now, this is not unprecedented. There are other school boards around the state that have either 4 or 6-year terms, but why 3 instead of, or I'm sorry, why 4 instead of 3?
So 4 would put it in those even years to be in the November elections, even years of voting with other issues to get higher voter turnout.
This would move school bond initiatives
Correct.
From April to November as well. Why?
Bond indebtedness and any tax issues, actually.
I was going to ask that as my follow-up question. So if, for instance, a school district wanted to just straight up raise its property levy, it would also be for November, correct?
It would have to be November, correct.
So what is the thinking behind that?
So, look, I'm a huge transparency person. I believe more voter turnout is better if we're going to raise our taxes and elect people in our school boards, which are very important things. I deal with what's called voter fatigue. We have huge elections in November. Then come April, people are they're tired with the political process. They don't know or they don't understand what's going on with it. And then they either don't vote or they forget to vote or they're just too busy.
April is often when cities and counties have tax increases or bond issues, but is there also a drive to move them to November? People would say what's good for the goose, in this case, St. Charles County government or Wentzville city government, wouldn't it be good for the gander, so to speak?
So, yeah, I mean, my original bill was to move all of the April elections. That wouldn't be a special, but all the April elections to the November elections. I can't stress, I believe more people at the voter block is going to have a better turnout on what the people in the area believe in.
The other thing that is notable in this bill is it will allow people to put either a R or a D, or I guess an L next to their names.
So
if
for
they want
libertarian.
Libertarian. Unfortunately, no NL, which is the Natural Law Party, which is about around transcendental meditation. But why do you think that's necessary, given that almost all school board races across the state are nonpartisan?
So school board races are nonpartisan, but to say they are not political would be doing an injustice to the school districts. Every school district race that I see has some politics in it one way or another. All this, let's first touch on this piece of the legislation here. This is not a mandatory issue. This is totally voluntary by the candidate, and the candidate can reach out to their elections authority and say, I want to declare I'm affiliated with A party, B party, C party, and that I want that printed next to my name on the ballot. That's all it would do.
I guess I have a question on the practicality of this that may come from a different angle. We'll hear about the other criticism of this later. There are plenty of Republicans in Jefferson City who do not hold quote-unquote conservative views on education policy, such as like providing direct support to private schools through vouchers or tax credits or whatever, or they don't support open enrollment. So would placing a party label on candidates really be that helpful, given that partisanship is not an automatic arbiter of somebody's views on education?
So, that would be strictly up to the candidate themselves on what they choose to do. If they think it would help them. Now, they don't, like when I go to the ballot or go to the Secretary of State's office, I have to declare with the party. This would not require that. This would just allow the candidate to self-identify. And I just think it's another way when people are trying to weed out who they want to vote for. That's another way, not the only way. If anybody does that the only way, that shouldn't be done that way. But it also helps them to kind of, if you claim yourself as a Republican or a Democrat, your party has guidelines that you should be following. And I think that if I look down and I see an R or a D, it would follow what their party says they should be doing, or the outlines of their party, and would help me make a better decision on where this person stands generally.
Yeah, I think that, again, would be the case for most issues. If you saw an R next to somebody's name, I would say 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to be against abortion rights, against gun control. But again, for education, it's not really that cut and dried. So I'm just asking again, how informative is that to people? I guess that's maybe a reason why they would have to actually learn more about the candidates before voting, and not just depending on the R, D, or L after their name.
Well, as I said when we first sat down, It's all about transparency for me. If that's one way for me to single that person out and do more information on them because I see an R or D and I start with them first. Again, I can't say enough that if you're just voting based upon that criteria, I don't think you're doing it justice.
Why does this only apply to St. Charles County and not other parts of the state?
Well, the original bills, both mine and Senator Schnelting's bill, encompass the whole state. Through the debate process on the Senate floor, it was chosen to put an amendment on this bill to only have St. Charles County. And the reason Senator Schnelting and myself are pushing for this, our county, the constituents in my county, our county government just had a resolution passed in county government. The majority of my county, not to mention my district, supports this and has been asking. I've ran this bill for 5 years now.
This bill did not pass by a landslide in the House after some procedural havoc, which if you really want to get into it, you can, but I think it's not really that important because it did pass.
It did.
It only passed with 83 votes, which is one more vote than needed to finally pass a bill in the Missouri House. Why did it have more trouble than other bills that Republicans put to the floor in getting across the finish line?
So, as you stated before, there are Republicans that have different views on schooling and school choice and school, how we deal with schools. Rural areas typically deal with their schooling different than the urban areas. There were Republicans. I'm not going to say they didn't go with party lines. I don't know that this was a party line vote. There were people on the Democrat side that supported this, but maybe not voted for it, but supported the initiative. So this isn't a party line vote. But for their school districts, maybe their superintendent came to them and said, look, we're a big supporter of everything that goes on this county, your schools. We would recommend that you not vote for it. And if that's your district and you feel you don't need to vote for it, then so be it. Now the vote was 83 to 81, and I lost 3 votes because this was the last day of session in the afternoon. So some folks had to leave. We had an emergency. Somebody left. And so, yeah, it was a very close vote.
Not to be pedantic, but I did look at the vote total, and there were also a lot of people that didn't vote. So I don't think it was exactly 83 to 81,
Sure.
but I see your overall point. You've argued that this bill would increase voter turnout in these races, which I think is almost certainly true, because if even the people that were happy about the April elections would concede, the turnout was much lower than would be in a November election. So that is undoubtedly true. But would it increase intention on these races, especially when there's statewide races, statewide ballot initiatives, county executive elections, state legislative races also on the ballot? Is there some concern that this could get lost in the shuffle?
So I've talked in depth with my my elections authorities, other elections authority. There is concern that it puts a lot on the ballot, but it also we've also talked about the fact that the people already there voting. You can undervote. You can choose not to vote on an issue if you don't understand the issue or you don't know the answer. I just feel that this will bring, when people are already at the voting block on these specific issues during this time, you're going to get a better voter turnout. You're going to get a better voter participation. I mean, in our general elections, we're between 40 and 50%, and in April election, we're down to 14%. I think that's has a lot to do with just voter fatigue on different issues. Hey, we just had all this voting now. I've forgotten to vote in an April election because I had something going on and I couldn't break away to do it. And I just think too many different voting dates. Now you talk about carve-outs and special issues. You just put a special issue on a special date and nobody shows up and you get your initiative passed because all the people that want to vote for it show up to vote and nobody else does.
I was going to tisk about you not voting in an April election, but I have also missed April elections before too, even though I've tried to vote as much as I can. So this legislation came as self-identified conservative school board candidates have been losing as of late in St. Charles County. And when I say self-identified, they literally have the words conservative on their signs. So this is not a pejorative. I'm being very literal here. And this includes a contest for the Francis Howell School Board. I spoke last month with Jamie Martin of Francis Howell Families, a group that campaigned for candidates who did not self-identify as conservative.
After 2 years of them losing, that entitlement really showed this year when they slapped conservative on all of their stuff and just refused to reflect. Doubled down. The vitriol was very obvious on their side of the fence. Our voters are very turned off by that. Our tone and our brand is bold civility. You can have any opinion you want. We're not going to block you as long as you're civil.
That was Jamie Martin of Francis Howell Families, a group that supported school board candidates in St. Charles County, and specifically that school district, who did not self-identify as conservative. So I think that's been the biggest criticism of this legislation. That the critics see these school board elections not going conservatives' way, and they see this as sort of like sour grapes that you're trying to move to a more advantageous election cycle. I want you to respond to that because I think if there's been anything that I've heard that probably deserves a response, it's probably that.
So let's start off with the fact that this did not come as a factor of that, as an issue of that. This has been, like I said, I've carried this bill for 5 years.
When, by the way, conservatives were winning school board races, by the way. So it can continue.
Absolutely. So this has been an issue in St. Charles County that was going on long before I got there. We want to change we want to have higher turnout in our school board races, in our voter rolls in April. That hasn't happened. So we want to move those to November. Now, again, this wasn't as a result of anybody losing any school board race. If I have 40% of the people turn out, and no matter who gets elected, I just think that's better for the people of St. Charles County. It has nothing to do with conservative or liberal or Republican or Democrat. It's just I want a better representation of people choosing the school board, because what happens is the school board, whoever it is, be conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republic or even independent, gets in, and then people say, well, I didn't know that was happening, or a tax bond gets passed and they say, I didn't know that was happening.
My last question for you, do you think this could eventually apply everywhere, especially if it does increase attention and civic participation in St. Charles County?
Well, I will say this. A lot of the debate or a lot of the questions I had from representatives when I was whipping the vote and working on, getting the final numbers was, why is my county not doing this? Why is my school district? Why aren't my school districts involved? And I said, well, basically that comes down to your senator. Your senator could have asked for it on the floor and been included. Right now, it was only St. Charles County that was interested in this issue.
State Representative Richard West is a Republican who represents several municipalities in St. Charles County, including Wentzville. Representative, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been nearly a year since Brian Garcon Rayo died by suicide in the Phelps County Jail. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency detained Garcon Rayo, who is from Colombia, after he was released from a St. Louis jail. He had been charged with using a credit card that wasn't his, which is a misdemeanor. Now Garcon Rayo's death is getting attention from Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro. He wrote on X earlier this week that, quote, Colombia Foreign Ministry must deliver a protest note, and the U.S. government must reflect on how immigration policy is killing Americans and Latin Americans. STLPR's Brian Munoz has been following this story for months. He now joins us to discuss Petro's statement. Brian, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Glad to be back, Jason.
Before we get to the Colombia president's statement, remind us who Brian Garcon Rayo was and why he was in the Phelps County Jail in the first place.
So Brian Garcon Rayo was a 27-year-old man who had immigrated to the United States via the southern border in California with his mother, Lucy Adriana, as she goes by as well. And they had fled Bogota, the capital of Colombia, because of growing threats of violence and harassment from law enforcement. They had loved living there, trying to form their life there, but the situation became untenable, and they made the ultimate decision that coming into the United States and seeking asylum was the best way to go.
And were they trapped in this never-ending limbo of the asylum process, which seems to ensnare a lot of people who come to America across the border?
So for Lucy and her daughters, yes. But whenever they arrived at the border, Brian had gotten separated because women and children are separated from men, typically in detention. And the mother got her court date, and Brian went on his way. But the mother and her family is still, facing their asylum cases as they're going through that kind of never-ending cycle. Brian Garcon Rayo ended up in custody after being charged with shoplifting at a Shrewsbury Walmart. He had eaten some chicken without paying for it, among other things. And he missed his court hearing for that charge, and there was a warrant put out for his arrest. Fast forward, he was found to have been using somebody's credit card that wasn't his own. His family contends that an acquaintance of his gave him the credit card, and he was just doing what this other guy was telling him to. So nevertheless, he ended up in custody there by St. Louis police once they were investigating that transaction, and ultimately turned him over to ICE custody, which drove him about 2 hours to the Phelps County Jail in Rolla.
And how often are these local jails used to detain people for alleged immigration violations? And is there a financial incentive for these jails to work with ICE?
There is a financial incentive for local jails to be working with ICE. So in Missouri, there are at least 4 facilities, St. Genevieve, Phelps County in Rolla, Ozark Jail down in Springfield area, as well as the Greene County Jail. And folks get paid, anywhere from $80 a day to hold a person for ICE to over $100 a day. And those reimbursement rates have been a point of conversation, to the point that the Rolla jail decided at one point recently, hey, this is no longer financially viable for us, so we're not going to do it. Presumably, the Department of Homeland Security came back and renegotiated that contract with them, so now they're housing folks again.
Petro mentioned Garcon Rayo wanted to call his mom and was not allowed to, and he chose suicide. You reported that he was not given a mental health evaluation. Who would have been responsible for letting him call his mother and get a mental health evaluation? Would it be ICE officials or Phelps County Sheriff's personnel?
I think there's a shared responsibility here between the two agencies to ensure that the protocols are being followed. Basically, the United States government, Department of Homeland Security, ICE, other federal agencies of that manner, sometimes U.S. Marshals, contract with these local jails to essentially carry out the detention of these individuals for any number of reasons. And presumably, it would be up to the Phelps County Sheriff's Office, who runs the jail, to ensure that they are receiving the adequate care, that the policies and protocols as laid out in the law and in the policy book are being followed, and things of that nature. I did reach out to the Phelps County Sheriff's Office to get a comment for the story, and they did not immediately respond.
You mentioned in your piece that Petro, the Colombian president, is making the statement as he's about to leave office. I double-checked. There is a Colombian presidential election, I think, in the next several days. So is there anything to these words beyond just symbolism?
I think that's a big question. I think you've seen a lot of Latin American leaders decry the treatment of immigrants in the United States. I think of Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico as one of the other outspoken voices and saying, like, hey, maybe the United States should re-examine how they're carrying out this immigration policy and making sure that it's being done in a humane and equitable way. But I think there is questions even amongst Brian Garcon Rayo's family of why now? You know, this happened a year ago.
And that was even my next question. Have you spoken with her, with his mother yet?
Yeah, I just spoke with her recently, actually. It's kind of bittersweet for her. Of course, she says that she appreciates the attention. She wants people to know what happened to her son and to realize that her son was more than just a criminal that some people are making him out to be, that he was a loving and caring individual that wanted to fight for his family and got wrapped up in some unfortunate circumstances. But the question, you know, kind of remains on, like, why now? And this was the first time that she had seen the video, was the reporting around this. So it brought some sense of closure, but there's still a lot of questions that she says remain. And she's hoping that as investigations and officials kind of go through what happened and if any protocol was being able to be changed, sense that to prevent this from happening again. What does that look like? And hopefully she gets some resolution here soon.
Brian Munoz is St. Louis Public Radio's photojournalism editor. He has been covering this story for months with other St. Louis Public Radio reporters. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jason.
And if you or somebody you know is struggling, help is available. Call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, available 24/7. That's 988, available through text or a call. We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk to Christian Mitchell about being the Democratic nominee for Illinois Lieutenant Governor. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker is asking voters for a third term in office. And this November, the Democratic chief executive is paired up with a new lieutenant governor hopeful, Christian Mitchell. Mitchell is a former Illinois House member who previously served as Pritzker's deputy governor. After working for his alma mater, the University of Chicago, Mitchell decided to get back into the electoral arena after Pritzker's current lieutenant governor, Juliana Stratton, ran for the U.S. Senate. He says he wanted to make sure the progress Pritzker made during his gubernatorial administration didn't stagnate, as he prepares for a rematch with Republican gubernatorial hopeful Darren Bailey.
When you get a chance to step up and be involved in trying to make the state that has given you everything that you didn't get from your God and your family, as Illinois has been for me, you take that shot. And when we can help move Illinois forward, work on the Illinois 2050 plan and make sure that we're creating jobs and making this a great place to live, and when you get to work with somebody like J.B. Pritzker, who you love and respect, that's just the kind of opportunity you don't say no to.
Now, let me be blunt. Illinois' lieutenant governor does not have a lot of power. They don't even get to bang a gavel while presiding over the Illinois Senate, since, unlike Missouri, the Illinois lieutenant governor does not have any legislative duties. But Pritzker's national ambitions are making his choice of Mitchell more relevant. He's widely expected to run for president in 2028, and that could mean Mitchell could become governor if Pritzker ascends to the presidency, vice presidency, or takes a cabinet-level post. Earlier this week, St. Louis Public Radio Metro East reporter Will Bauer joined me to talk with Mitchell about his decision to run for lieutenant governor and what Pritzker's third term could mean for Illinois residents. When we started our conversation, we asked him about his background and how he got involved in Illinois politics.
Christian Mitchell is the son of Debbie Gist, who lives here in Illinois, and the grandson of James Gist, my late grandfather. They were really the two people who raised me, and they are my heroes. And my mom was a NICU nurse, neonatal intensive care, so taking care of literally the sickest and most vulnerable babies for 38 years of her career. And then my grandfather was a Union steelworker, but also was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and very proudly served in the Korean conflict. And so who I am is their son and grandson. I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago, Maywood and Westchester. And had a pretty normal suburban life until, I think, like so many families in Illinois, we found out we were just one hit away from having some economic distress. That happened for me when I was in high school. Both of my grandparents got very sick, one with dementia that became Alzheimer's, the other with heart disease, that being my grandfather. And my mother got breast cancer. Fortunately, she beat it. She's a survivor for more than 20 years, but it turned our lives upside down. And I think that really put me on the path to public service. I initially wanted to, be a lawyer and make money and make sure my family didn't suffer. But in meeting people, both after college when I was a community organizer, and then during my time even in college, I found out my story was not uncommon. And in finding that, I figured that one way to make a difference was by trying to change the system to make sure that what happened to my family and so many others would be less common, to try to lower the cost of healthcare, to try to raise wages. And that's why I ran for state rep for the first time. It's why I joined J.B. Pritzker's administration as deputy governor for the first time. And it's why I jumped back in to run for lieutenant governor.
There's a lot of speculation that Governor Pritzker is going to run for president after he gets reelected, and I'm sure you're not going to announce that he's going to do that on this show. But it does put increased focus on the lieutenant governor, since you could be elevated if Pritzker either becomes president, vice president, or takes a cabinet position in a Democratic administration. So I want you to talk a little bit about why, if the time comes, for whatever reason, you are ready to become governor of one of the largest and most important states in the nation.
Yeah. JB has always said, he said this for Juliana Stratton, our wonderful lieutenant governor, who's now, God willing, going to be our next United States senator. The number one qualification for the job of lieutenant governor is being able to step in if anything were to happen for whatever reason. And for me, it was talking about this a bit in response to Will's question. I was fortunate to oversee some of our largest agencies, our transportation system, emergency management, and our state police, as well as our National Guard. I oversaw a very broad policy portfolio that covered everything from infrastructure to energy, public safety, election reform. So I have, I think, a fairly broad amount of experience from that time on the executive level. I was a legislator, and so much of what a good governor and lieutenant governor do is work with the legislature. So I think I have really significant experience there. But most importantly, all that prepares me to be the best governing partner I possibly can be to J.B. Pritzker. If anything happens, yes, I'll be ready. But for the most part, what I'm really focused on is how I can be the best lieutenant governor I can be, help move the state forward, help our farmers, help our small businesses. That's the thing that I'm really excites me to get up in the morning.
So as we look at your opponents for November, I have kind of noticed that maybe in some ways Darren Bailey has either broken with President Trump or maybe even the national Republican brand in a few cases this cycle, right? And he's said that he's his own person. He's criticized Trump for posting the AI image that had depicted himself as Jesus. He criticized another AI image that the RNC posted that mocked Governor Pritzker's weight. He apologized for calling Chicago a hellhole, which he did 4 years ago. And he recently even made that appeal to the city council. But correct me if I'm wrong here, your team doesn't seem convinced that he's maybe changed. Why so?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's good that Darren Bailey knows that Donald Trump is not God. I think that's a good start. But I think that the proof of the pudding remains in the eating. And you know, I always grew up, my mother always said, if you want to know who someone is, you should not listen to what they say so much as watch what they do. And I think that for Darren Bailey, there are a series of things that he has not changed his position on, right? He still said abortion is worse than the Holocaust. He is still someone who wants to roll out the red carpet in Illinois for Donald Trump. And, you know, not, by the way, not just Democrats in Illinois are turning their back on Donald Trump. So are many Republicans and independents. You know, one thing that Darren Bailey cannot seem to do is prove that he will stand up to Donald Trump in a substantive way. Here's one really good example. Darren Bailey is a farmer. He runs on being a farmer. He talks about that as an important credential, even though he inherited his farm and is a millionaire. He will not even stand up right now as Donald Trump is ravaging the agricultural economy of the state of Illinois. I was down in Jerseyville and Metro East a couple of months ago on a cattle farm. And they are being crushed by higher input costs, fertilizer, the cost of fuel, all these things from the war that Donald Trump started in Iran, but also from the tariffs that raised all their input costs while giving $20 billion away to Argentine farmers. And so you would think if you really cared about the people of Illinois, you were willing to stand up to Donald Trump on the very issue that is the thing you brag about, you would think that'd be the place you'd stand up, and he can't even do that. So why I would think somebody who is attempting to change their rhetoric, put lipstick on a pig, but not substantially change any of their positions to help Illinois women, to help Illinois farmers, would suddenly be a different person. Again, it's a difference between your rhetoric and your actions, and his actions say he's the same person he's always been.
I have lived through an Illinois governor who has served more than 2 terms, Jim Thompson, but I was not really conscious about politics during then. When he left office, I was, 7 years old. So I want to say I was paying attention to Illinois politics when I was 7, but I'd be a liar. So my question for you, given that the governor, whether you like him or not, has accomplished a lot in 8 years, what are some of the main priorities that a third Pritzker term would want to accomplish?
A couple of them are things I think that he's pushing right now, Jason. So, you know, one is we've got across the nation, this is not just an Illinois problem. We have an incredible shortage of housing. Illinois needs to build something like 225,000 housing units in the next 4 or 5 years just to keep up with demand. The governor's right now pushing a build plan that would create more middle market housing, that would cut red tape, that would allow for a wider range of housing types, including things like ADUs, backyard cottages, or above garage sort of properties. Those sorts of things could all bring down housing costs. So thinking about how we make Illinois a more affordable place to live is a big deal. How we continue to lower costs generally and also raise wages. How we continue to, yes, fight Donald Trump in Washington to make sure tariffs go away and the lower costs, but also to make sure that healthcare is more affordable. Part of what you see, I think I mentioned this earlier from HR 1, there are 9 hospitals, rural hospitals in the state of Illinois that will be in danger of closing from the Medicaid cuts in HR 1. And oh, by the way, a whole bunch of safety net hospitals in cities, places like the south and west sides of Chicago, Rockford, Decatur, that could be in danger from Medicaid cuts. So I think it's continuing to make sure we protect the progress that's already been made, but also the other big thing, and it's going to be a focus of mine, is economic development all across the state of Illinois. It's why I was in Jerseyville. It's why I've been to Belleville, to Alton, to Cahokia. I've got vacancies on State Street in Chicago. I've also got main streets all around the state of Illinois that need to make sure they're places that people can live, work, and raise a family. So I think it's that economic development work and that broad vision of the future for Illinois and protecting the progress that's been made to keep us from going back in the way that Donald Trump and Darren Bailey would want to take us.
In terms of other legislation, I wanted to ask about the Safety Act. So if elected, do you think the Pritzker and Mitchell administration will advocate for any changes to the Safety Act, particularly the portion of the bill that eliminated cash bail?
So the thing to remember about the Safety Act, I want to just take us back for a second. I want to remind your listeners what people are defending. People were defending a system that prior to the ending of cash bail meant that your wealth was what determined whether or not you stayed in jail pending trial versus your potential threat to the community. We have multiple studies, Loyola did one, et cetera, that shows that the ending of cash bail has actually made us safer and has actually meant we can detain more dangerous offenders. We don't want to go back to a world where how much money you have in your pocket determines whether you get out of jail. Having said that, one of the issues I know people have raised a lot of issues about is electronic monitoring, making sure that the resources necessary to monitor folks are there. That may be an example of a place where some changes could be made. I think there are smart and credible folks, both sides of the aisle, who are looking at things that could tighten the rules a bit. But what we're not going to do is go back to a system where wealth determines whether you stay in prison and not how dangerous you might be to the community. So we want to give judges and prosecutors the tools that they need to make the case for detention and not be in a situation where how much money you have determines whether you get out or not.
So we couldn't let you leave without asking you about data centers, which seem to have drawn bipartisan pushback, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. And the Power Act is one of the legislative proposals in the Illinois General Assembly that had kind of been seen as a primary vehicle to regulate data center construction. It would require public water use reports, environmental assessments, developers to build renewable energy to power them. And that legislation has kind of stalled, but there is still some time left in this session. So what would you like to see done in this space?
Yeah, so you might have seen that the governor proposed, there was, as part of the Rebuild Illinois Capital Program, there's a data center tax credit that the governor proposed pausing. And in part, it's because there's really real concern from folks right now. And on the one hand, data centers can mean economic development. They can mean investment in what's necessary to keep, growing our economy. On the other hand, they can mean massive power spikes for consumers. And I think that when you've got companies with trillion-dollar market caps, they ought to be able to guarantee my energy bill, your energy bill, Jason and Will, and those of your listeners should not go up to do this thing that the trillion-dollar companies want. That is a doable thing, and we believe that we can do it that way. So we want to make sure that, we want to be part of a future that is building the economy and the jobs of tomorrow, but we want you to pay for the energy you use. We want you to make real investments in the workforce. We want you to make sure that people living near these data centers are not the ones left holding the bag.
You mentioned I don't want to say demise of the Voting Rights Act, because the entire Voting Rights Act did not get struck down by that Supreme Court decision, but certainly the demise of the protection of majority and minority districts, which has prompted a bunch of states in the South to start dismantling heavily African American and heavily Democratic districts. There's probably going to be a lot of pressure for states like Illinois to redraw its map in 2027. I guess there's a couple questions I have here. Can you actually squeeze any more Democratic seats out of the current map? And if you can, would that require making existing African American majority or Hispanic majority seats more white? And would that really be worth it just to gain maybe one or two seats in Illinois?
I mean, let's start with the foundation of what this is. And what this is voter suppression. What this is the dilution of African American voting power directly, full stop, absolutely, in some of the states that you've mentioned. But I also want to remind folks that much of the representation that diverse folks of all backgrounds, whether they're Asian or Latino or African American, comes from the Voting Rights Act. And this has been a systemic effort over 15 years. Section 5, now Section 2, undermining the ability of the Justice Department to oversee potential discriminatory things like voter ID or other things that try to take away minority voting power. And then after making it harder for people to register to vote, putting even more emphasis on partisanship in a way that undermines African American and minority voting power. That's what this is. I will say to your question here in Illinois, we have always drawn our districts in accordance with the Voting Rights Act in ways that are consistent with the Illinois Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. There probably isn't a lot of room here to do much more, just to be really direct about it. And so I think that what the governor and myself and others are going to focus on is how do we support efforts in other states to combat this sort of voter suppression. But we have really focused on acting in accordance with the Voting Rights Act, both locally and nationally. And so I think our maps are in pretty good shape.
That was Christian Mitchell, who is the Democratic nominee for Illinois Lieutenant Governor. You can listen to the rest of our conversation by going to stlpr.org or wherever you find your Politically Speaking podcasts.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wysentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.